All right. Hi, everybody. Nice to have you all here today. I know just about everybody here, but just in case, my name is Jeff. I'm the Senior Director of External Affairs here at the Museum of Idaho, and we're happy to have you here. I have a couple of other staff members here. We have Camille on the camera and Caitlin in the back there. Anything you all need while you're here, feel free to let us know and we'll take care of you. We have some folks joining us online as well, so you're aware. And we'll go ahead and get started. So a couple of quick housekeeping notes. First of all, I'll remind everybody to silence your phones if you haven't done so already. And then we are running up here at the museum against our next exhibit changeover. If anyone hasn't enjoyed Genghis Khan, Conquest and Culture yet, you've got 4 more days to do so. Monday, Labor Day, September 5th is its final day. That means it will also be the final day of our wonderful live musical performances as well. If anyone hasn't caught one of those yet, it's worth a repeat visit just for that. So please come and see that if you haven't yet. And then we are excited to be rolling out our next exhibit, Toytopia, on October 1st. That is a cultural history of toys and games, highly interactive, highly nostalgic. Whatever decade of the 20th century you grew up in, we have your toys here. And we're going to talk about why you liked them so much. And it's going to be a lot of fun. So join us for that. Public opening is October 1st for that. We will have a museum member preview day on September 29th, and then our VIP exhibit opening party on the 30th. So we hope to see everybody that week at some point. In addition, I'll just put a quick plug in for our next museum club. So now that it is technically fall again, I'm going to call it starting today. I guess it's 100 degrees outside, but it's September, so we're calling it fall. We're going to go back to every 2 weeks, every first and third Thursday. And so 2 weeks from today, on September 15th, we have a wonderful presentation by Myrna Taylor, who is going to be talking about stories learned from a Revolutionary War ledger that has been passed down in her family since the Revolutionary War. And she has just cracked it open and has been doing some fantastic research and learning some really interesting stories that had been lost to history until now. So that should be a lot of fun. Let's see, without further ado, then I'm going to go ahead and introduce our speaker today, Ann Allison. Many of you in here know Ann Allison one way or another. She is a pillar of our community. She is a board member of the Idaho Humanities Council and a wonderful supporter of the arts and humanities and this Museum of Idaho as well. Ann grew up in Idaho Falls and then lived in New York City for many years, working in emerging technologies for companies such as Citibank and Avis Rent-A-Car. And she's too modest to note this, but I happen to know that she was in rather high executive positions at these companies as well. Came back after New York to live here several years ago. She has an MBA and a PhD. And in addition to her business career, she taught media studies at Hofstra University and has written several books on business, new media, and for fun, a murder mystery, which does sound fun. And she thinks the Museum of Idaho is terrific. And she said that unprompted. So I appreciate that as well. So we'll turn the time over to Ann Allison to talk about how cultural genes affect community prosperity.
Take a minute, it always does. Okay, is the sound okay? Okay, so nice to see all of you. And hello to those people I can't see who are online. There will be a few things that I'm handing out today on pieces of paper. So if you're online, and you would like to have those pieces of paper after this presentation, if you let Jeff know, or if you know me, you let me know, I will email them to you. So on your tables, you will find pipe cleaners. This is so that you can play, right? Sitting is not something that human beings do naturally, right? We have hundreds of thousands of years of evolving in other ways. So this is just so that you can play. That's the entire purpose of them. Okay. So I thought I'd start by telling you just a little bit about how the research happened that I'm going to be talking about. I, as Jeff said, worked for Citibank for a long time, and I did emerging technologies around the world. So I opened the very, very first virtual branch bank ever in the world. And it was way ahead of the market. We got 30,000 absolutely loyal customers and couldn't get 30,001 for another 20 years, right? Because we were still doing dial-up modems with floppy disks. For those of you who remember floppy disks, we had all of that, right? So I really was a pioneer in helping people to understand, hey, can you sit over there so you don't have my back to you? That would be great. Thank you. I did a lot of technology around the world. And one of the things that Citibank asked me to do after I did the banking by computer was to work on banking by telephone. So when I started on banking by telephone, what happened was you called your local branch bank. You got somebody who you knew, which you thought was really peachy keen, but they gave you the wrong information 50% of the time. So I worked on getting better answers on the phone, but also people being able to actually do things with their phone, right? Transfer money, deposit, et cetera, et cetera. So one of the things that happened was that in one of the areas I was responsible for was in Asia Pacific. So that was 15 countries. This was in the 90s, from Singapore, the most wired then, and probably still the most wired now, to India. This was before cell phones. You couldn't call from one town to the next. A really interesting thing happened. We beat our goals by 10 times, not 10%, but 10 times. And I got to say, you know, we had a good marketing program, but that doesn't create 10 times the results. We had good operations. That doesn't create good 10 times results either. So instead of a sports car, I went back for my midlife crisis to try to understand why human beings were so determined, engaged, fascinated by electronic media. We were just absorbing more and more and more and more and more, right? So I wanted to know why that was. So I went back to get my PhD. And because I was older and because I was employed, they let me kind of wander around New York University and study with whoever I wanted to study with, which is really cool. And then they let me write this theoretical dissertation, which they don't let kids write who are looking for teaching jobs because you can't get hired, right? With a theoretical dissertation, doesn't work. 10 years later and 615 pages later, I wrote my dissertation, which won the award for best dissertation in its field. So that is the research. And I've been working on that research ever since then, updating and adding it to us. And yes, welcome. Thank you. Just find a chair over there that you're comfortable with so I don't have my back to you. That's great. So that's what I'm going to be talking about, but updated, right? So I work on it pretty much every day. So what do I hope to do today with you guys? Here's what I hope. I hope we'll explore some examples of how society thrives and is challenged in different eras. I think we'll look at how we influence cultural genes in good and bad ways. So cultural genes are just like biological genes, and we'll talk more about that. And just like biological genes, you can influence them in really good ways and in really bad ways. So important for us to understand about that. And then I want to help you create a map showing where you your family, and your community is in time. So this may not be something you think about very often. Where am I in time? So I will give you some notions, and then you will decide for yourself on a map. So that's what I hope to do in the next bit. I want to start by saying I'm going to focus on communications, human communications, and us as humans. So our communication technology. You could focus on technology itself. You could focus on many, many different things. Lots of studies looking at different things. The reason that I choose communication is that it is my belief and my research that because we can communicate the way we can, we are able to live in pretty much every place on the planet, in lots of different situations, in lots of different ways, in lots of different organizations, and we are able to succeed. In fact, we are so able to succeed that we overwhelm ourselves. So we get new communication technology, think, oh, this is really cool. We develop new social things, we get all excited, and then we are so successful that we actually have too many human beings and too much culture and too much organization, and we can't manage it anymore. So we make new communication technologies, and we do this over and over and over again. So if we were to start with language, and what were we doing when we had language? We were mostly hunters and gatherers. That was our occupation. That's how we fed ourselves and kept ourselves warm to the extent that we did. So we had language and hunting and gathering, and we got overwhelming success. We had too many folks and too many things. And so we needed to develop new things. So we got writing and agriculture. And we have done this over and over and over again. So here are a series of those overwhelms. So we went from writing and agriculture to printing, which then enabled us to have manufacturing. When we were way successful in that, then we needed to do more things. So information started to be our business, right? So most people worked in information. And what do I mean by that? I mean, they worked in news, they created software, they worked in Facebook, they worked in services. Somehow they worked in marketing, they worked in sales, they worked in information. And that was enabled by mass media and global networks. The last one that we're going to talk about today, there are more, is the recreation and recreation era. And what I mean by that is an era where we spend a lot of our time and attention in recreation on social media and other ways. And recreation, what do I mean by recreation? I mean cloning, I mean new material development. I mean, we are actually literally recreating what's around us. That make sense? So that's the big pattern. And let's just take a quick look at how long that's been taking place. So we've had language for 200,000 years. We've had social media for maybe 12, kind of, depending on who you are. And we get really impatient because social media doesn't work really well yet, and it doesn't. It's causing us some problems. But we've been doing that for 12, 13 years. I don't know about you, but I still get language screwed up from time to time. Occasionally, I don't speak as clearly as I might, right? So we've had 200,000 years of practice for that and about 12 years for social media. So I actually think there's some hope that over time, we can develop better social media that will be more enriching to us and more helpful. So this actually shows that a little bit better than that other. This needs to have those words. So the graph doesn't really show you. There's the 200,000 years, right? And then these other eras are shorter and shorter and faster and faster. So social change keeps happening faster and faster and faster. So we're going to look at these three eras to start with. So here we have a farmer going to work. Okay. Now we have a bunch of people going to work that look like this. That's pretty different, actually, right? And then we have this person who it took 15 seconds to get to work after she sat down and clicked into her Zoom meeting, right? So those are three different ways of transporting ourselves. So we might say that's the agricultural society, then the manufacturing society, and then the information society. And it has patterns to it. So let's look at these guys. Here we are making music. And then here we are making music. And this actually looks quite different from that. And you see its structure, right? It's different and it has more technology to it. And then we have something like Beyonce. For Beyonce to do what she does, takes 60 trucks of gear that you can't see, 60 trucks of gear, and many, many, many people sitting at screens and making things happen behind her. So music changed also. Now let's look at, these guys are bringing in the harvest, something that some folks are doing here right now in Idaho. And then these folks are working in a different place, in a different time, with different construction, with different society, right? Quite different. And then we have this, which you can work from the breach. Whether it's desirable or not is another question, but there's a lot of technology behind this, a lot of stuff behind it. And so we have this kind of a pattern. So that might be work and how it's changed over time. So if you look at these, and then you look at these, you see how those are kind of similar? They're kind of divided up and organized in a particular kind of way. And then we have these, which are organized in a completely different kind of way, right? So you might just take a minute, and I'm not asking you to answer these out loud, although you're welcome to do that if you like. But what size might be the groups in this agricultural society? What pace might life be? How complex would it be? How many connections would there be both inside the society and outside the society? And we look at this. How big can these guys be? Well, they can be pretty big, right? They can be states, they can be nations, they can be national health systems, they can be pretty big. What pace? What complexity? What kind of connections? Pretty different from the first set. And how about the information society? How big can the information society be? What's the pace? What's the complexity? What are the connections? So each era, everything in our era is shaped by our genes, our cultural genes. And cultural genes are just like biological genes. Like you can have genes for blue eyes or brown hair, and it goes white eventually, and like that, right? You have genes, and they're affected by what we eat, how stressed we are, how much love there is in our lives, all of that. And our cultural genes are affected similarly by whether we're afraid, whether we're angry, whether we're interested, whether we feel connected, right? Those cultural genes are affected in a similar way. So here we have these three societies, and we might say, well, what might we call the organizations in those societies? So in the agricultural society, it was a village, right? Small group of people lived together mostly their entire lives in a village. In the manufacturing society, then we started to organize into these big bureaucracies where we could organize a lot more people over more time. And then in the information society, we start to have networks, which are flexible, not as fixed as bureaucracies, have different patterns and different connections. So, whoops, that's not supposed to show up there. I'm sorry about that, but we'll see it again in a minute. So, in a village, if we were to think about what's the pattern in the agricultural society, we might think of it as a circle. And inside that circle is pretty much where everybody lives in an agricultural society. Inside, that's where the attention is. That's where the connection might happen, right? Inside that circle. Then we get to this thing, which was not supposed to show up till now, right? And bigger and lots more organization, much more structure, interesting kinds of top-down power, right? Much, much bigger. And then we get networks, right? Bigger again, more fluid, less structured, can do different things. So if we were to think of this as structure, okay, and let's ask some other questions. How did we keep order in these different areas? How did we do that? So in the agricultural society, we kept order with social pressure. And what do I mean by that? I meant your parents and the sort of head people of the village and their approval of what you did or didn't do was extremely important. And if eventually you did not do what they said, more or less, especially in times before now, they threw you out and you died, right? So it wasn't like warm and comfy. It was like, this is the way we're going to do things, and this is how it's going to be. So that's how we kept order. There were also some very good things about that, right? It was very close, it was very engaged, right? So there were both advantages and disadvantages to that. So how did we keep order once we moved to bureaucracy? Well, here's the problem. We take these folks here and we put them in downtown Salt Lake. And there's someone misbehaving across the street and they frown at them. Does that person care? They don't care. Don't know them. You don't know them. Doesn't matter. Right? It's not like a village where it matters if the person frowns at you. And so it doesn't work. So we needed to get laws and police. We needed to get a bureaucratic way of keeping order. And it's really fascinating that the Amish villages in Pennsylvania have become so successful that they are larger than they can control with social pressure. And they needed to actually bring in, they actually asked the Pennsylvania State Police to come in and help them keep order. Very reluctantly, I must say, very reluctantly, but they were so big, they couldn't remember who they said to what. So laws and police. Then how do we keep order when we get to networks? So this is a really interesting thing. And many of you in this room will remember this. You might remember the first time that you thought about maybe you would buy something from eBay, or Etsy didn't exist then, but some of the very first networked companies online. You thought you might buy something, there's no store to look at, there's no store manager to know, there's no product to feel, there's no. So how did we keep order? We kept order by using trust. And this is not like Sunday school trust. This is trust that something will happen. So for example, my company, the Allison Group, did business in Saudi Arabia in the 1990s. I didn't do business with anyone that I absolutely didn't trust would pay me, because if they didn't pay me, I'm up the creek. I can't go to small claims court. You know, New York City police going to Saudi Arabia is not going to help anything. So trust. So what we start to see online, we start to see all these things that businesses and foundations and nonprofits start to put up things like trust me, trust me, trust me. You'll see on websites all kinds of trust me signs. So this is a rating that Charity Navigator, whose business it is to rate charities, gave to Rotary, and Rotary says, oh, look, you can trust us, right? Rotary also thinks that being a member of these fundraising organizations that have ethics, that means maybe you can trust them, right? Being on CNBC maybe means you can trust them. So they're putting up signs that help you think maybe you will be able to trust them. And you will notice as you do business around the world, what you'll be looking for are, oh, trust me signs, right? And if you don't trust them, and if it doesn't convince you, then typically you don't do it. So how do we educate our children? Well, in the agricultural age, they get to watch. And then maybe they get to do, but they get to watch. When we got to bureaucracy, even though we had printing presses, we didn't have enough books to go around. And so we had this idea that everybody should memorize pretty much everything, right? Unfortunately, some of us are still stuck in that. And the problem now is not too little information. The problem now is too much information. And so now people need to be doing. So this is a class in Rexburg. It's a high school class. And they are actually preparing something that NASA sent into space to test padding and making it safe to ship medical supplies into space. And they designed and NASA sent, so doing, right? A really interesting and good example of doing. So how do we evaluate others? In the agricultural age, it was kind of given. It's like almost pasted on us. If you were born to a farmer, you were going to be a farmer, right? If you were, and here's the kind of opposite of that, if you were born to a king, you were going to be a king. And if you weren't interested in being a king, you didn't get to hold you and say, you know what, I'm really not interested in this king business. I'd like to be a farmer. Nope. You might get to be dead, but you didn't get to be a farmer, right? So it was like attached to us. That's how we evaluated people. When we moved to cities, you know, everybody didn't know who you were. They didn't know that your parents were farmers. And you could get a diploma. You could learn how to weld. You could get a university degree. And then somebody might hire you because you had some kind of education, some sort of diploma. So you could achieve something. And then we started rating everything. So it used to be that the New York Times was the book reviewer of record, and everybody sort of paid attention to what they said. And now we rate, everybody rates books, and then we review the reviewers, and then we review the reviews of the reviewers. And we rate people on Etsy who make their living that way. We rate all kinds of things. So here we have Etsy, but we also have, I actually bought a pair of shoes like this, right? But I was looking at, what about the seller? And you know, you might have to decide what movie you're going to watch. But not only things like that, but also we rate public judges. We rate teachers. We rate pretty much everybody. If you work in a big organization, you probably get 360-degree feedback, whether you want it or not. Sometimes it's really helpful, sometimes not quite so much. So cultural genes. What are some examples of cultural genes? So these kinds of things that we've been talking about. Transportation, music, work, group structure, keeping order, educating our children, evaluating others. Those create different societies. All those different genes. And how we approach them matters. So I'm going to put these up and then ask, do we leave the past behind? I'm going to say, you guys all have seen, I'm sure, these Russian nested dolls, right? With dolls inside of dolls, inside of dolls, inside of dolls, right? I'm going to say, we don't leave the past behind. So let me give you 2 examples. Let's take evaluating others. It still matters if you're born to the Rockefellers, right? Still matters. It still matters if you have a college degree or a welding certificate, still matters. And it matters how you get assessed, right? All of those. So when kids say to parents or grandparents, it's more complicated today, it's more complex than it was when you were growing up, they're right. There are more layers. And the old layers don't go away. They change a little bit, but they don't go away. So even though you might be in a network era, you still have friends and family. Trust me, that's like a little village. And if you do things that they don't like, they're probably gonna let you know, right? So that functions kind of like a little village. Even if you're in the information era, you still have to pay taxes, still have to obey the speed limit. So you still have to deal with the bureaucratic structures, and you have the new structures, right? So they don't go away. They're like inside of us. So what? Well, people have thrived in a lot of different ways, right? It's possible to have a good life using a lot of different cultural genes. We have a personal connection to past eras, all of us. And we can use this understanding to connect with others. So one of the things I think is a big problem in our country today is we are stopping talking to each other and yelling sometimes at each other, but mostly not talking to each other. We can use our experience in these different eras to help us look at what people are doing and maybe ask some questions rather than judging first, and maybe thinking about how we might be able to connect with them. So, how did our societies change? What are some of the trends? So let's look at transportation. Transportation was faster by a lot and more complex. Music was much more technological over time, both physical and social, right? So not only the instruments and all the electronics that we now use in music, but also how we organize ourselves in our music. So we have lots of musical groups that are global in nature, even though they're small, right? So, and more complex. Work is more flexible, and by that I mean you're not tied to, we have to plant right now because now is when we have to plant. We have to harvest right now because now is when we have to harvest, right? It's more flexible. You can work in different places, and it's more complex. Our structure includes more people, right? Every time more people, and it's more complex. Our geography and where we interact gets larger and larger and more complex. Our education uses more and more information, and it's more complex. Our evaluation of others gives us more freedom. So even though you were born to a farmer, you can get a degree. And even if you don't get a degree, you can get assessed sometimes and get a job and do other things. So there's more personal freedom in what we do and more complex. So what are the trends? Faster, more technology, more flexible, more people, larger geography, uses more information, more freedom, more complex. So would I say, is more complex better? This is really important. I would say more complex is more complex. It's not better. It's not worse. It's adapted to a different situation, right? So please don't anybody leave here saying, Mary Ann says more complex is better. Mary Ann doesn't say that. Mary Ann doesn't say less complex is better either. Mary Ann says we need to look at what situation we're in and figure out consciously what kinds of processes and structures will best serve us. So I'm going to pass out, and you folks online can see this. And yep, that would be great if you could help. I'm just going to give you a bunch of these, and my sister Sheila will help everybody else get some. And for those of you online, I'm sorry, I didn't really think through that there might be people online, so you can get in touch with Jeff or with me, and I will send you copies. So I want to take just a couple of minutes to go through an exercise, and you can write things down or not, that's not important, but to just think about ways of determining status and what are the advantages and disadvantages. So when we think about the given in the agricultural age, what are some of the advantages of that kind of assessment? Well, the first thing is it's more flexible than instinct. Animals have no choice at all. We have some choice. We can teach children, so it's more flexible. It creates really close relationships. Villages typically have very, very close relationships. There's some group safety in it. and it's very durable. It lasts for centuries, right? Human beings lived and thrived in villages for centuries and centuries and centuries. So what are some of the disadvantages of this given status? Well, it can be repressive. If you have a different idea of who you are than your village does, not so good usually. It resists change, right? Doesn't change very easily. It's not very tolerant. There's very little privacy, right? We used to kill witches because they gathered herbs and tried to help people, basically, and they were a little different, but people were afraid because they were a little different. So advantages and disadvantages. One isn't better, one isn't worse. So now let's look at achieved. So what are some of the advantages of achievement? More personal freedom, for example, right? You can go to college, you can get a welding degree, you can do all different kinds of things, and you get more choices. And you can even change. Mid-career, you can change what you do. Say, you know, I've done this, I'm tired of doing this, I want to do something else. Not pasted onto you. It gives us a much broader based society. It gives you more privacy and more fulfillment, more chance for those things. So disadvantages. Anybody want to suggest what a disadvantage of achievements might be? So often people sort of hiccup at this. What do you mean a college degree might be bad? How can you say that? Well, I can say being burdened by student loans, not a happy thing, right? Going to a university and spending a lot of time and money and then deciding at the end of 4 years or 6 years or 8 years, you know, I don't really like this, can be problematic. People going to university and thinking this is going to make my life perfect and I'm going to make lots of money, maybe a false sense of hope. You can go to a bad school. You can get certificates that aren't real, right? So there can be fraud. So there are advantages and disadvantages. So how about being rated? Well, it's evidence-based. So that's an advantage, right? You can actually watch somebody do something and you don't have to say you don't have a degree. You can say, I see you can do that. Okay. It can enable trust. So we have eBay and Etsy and all kinds of places we buy online, many different ways, many different places. It can propose personal growth. It enables some people to skip college. You get a broader audience. What are some disadvantages? Well, let's just start with people who buy ratings. Let's just have an add to that Facebook meanness that puts teenagers close to suicide, right? So ratings that may be spite-based or anger-based or fear-based or just plain malicious. It drives extreme behavior. They can be hard to take even if they're accurate, right? When they're not accurate, it's even worse and they're hard to get rid of. When they're online, they're really hard to get rid of. So that's just a look at advantages and disadvantages of just one gene in 3 eras, right? You can do this for yourself. It takes a little thought sometimes. Anytime, looking at any society or any person that's doing something that you're not understanding. You might say, well, what are the advantages of that? And what might be the disadvantages of that? Right? So if you think it's really wonderful, you might want to look for the disadvantages. And if you think it's really awful, you might say, well, you know, people in general are pretty smart. Why are they doing that? I think that's a really bad idea, but why are they doing that? So I want to say that greed, fear, and abuse of power make the disadvantages worse. They make them show up and they make them worse. So you just need to kind of bear that in mind and try to not be judging. So what? So we influence pieces of our society. We influence our cultural genes. Consciously or unconsciously? Oh dear, I turned it off, but I have an alarm. I'm so sorry. There we go. By the way, these things are part of your kids' bodies, maybe part of yours too, but at least part of your kids. So we influence our cultural genes, either consciously or unconsciously. I want to say consciously is better. We have so much change in our lives now that it's time for us to become conscious about our cultures, about our societies, about what makes them up, and about how we can influence them. Right? We can, choose just to be angry and annoyed and think the world is not doing what we'd like it to do, or we can understand that we're part of it, right? And step up, kind of my thought. So the kinds of problems that we face change too. And this is a really important thing. So I'm going to look at some different kinds of problem types. So here's an early farmer on an early tractor. And I'm going to use my brother-in-law, John, who farms outside of Ashton. And I'm going to say if John assembled 5 people, his friends, right, to come and look at a tractor that had broken down, here's a tractor, they would pretty much agree on what the problem is and how to fix it. There might be a little variation, but pretty much agree. Now let's talk about a complex problem. So here's the question of how do we farm? Should we be doing sustainable agriculture? Should we be using fertilizer at all? Should we? How should we farm? John collects those same farmer friends. They might agree that we should be farming and thinking about how we should farm. Would they agree on how we should farm? Probably not so much, right? By the way, these things are not, simple doesn't mean easy. Killing a mastodon is not easy, but it's comparatively simple, right? How we farm today in the world is not at all simple. We don't have a lot of agreement around that. So then let's look at what's called wicked. And I didn't make this term up, by the way. This comes out of science, this term wicked. And here is a really big house outside of Ashton on some land that used to be farmland. Probably not so many people in Ashton could actually afford this house. The land is no longer in farming. Some people think this is a hunky-dory idea. It's a beautiful house. People who live in it probably like it a lot. Some people in Ashton think this is a hunky-dory idea. Some people in Ashton think this is a really big problem because it's harder and harder to live and work and farm in Ashton, right? Because prices go up. So we don't even agree whether or not there is a problem. Never mind how we might address it, right? So that's a very different kind of a problem than fixing a tractor. And most of us have in our heads when we look at social problems, tractors. Oh, we'll just fix this and it'll be done. It'll be fine. There isn't one. So how do wicked problems look? They are composed of people, many people. The people come and go. The people change their minds. People do all kinds of things that people do. There's no agreement about what the problem is. The limiting factors change. What's happening's changed. If you've ever been on any kind of board of directors, or how about the Planning and Zoning Commission? There's a fun place to be, right? So the limiting factors change. There is no objectively right answer. We don't get to a thing and say, oh, this is it. Everybody agrees. This is it. Nope, we don't get there. And there's no perfect lasting solution. We have to address it over and over and over and over again. So I'm not going to take today to talk about how we work on problem types. That's something we could do at a different time if you were interested. But just to get the notion of, so what? With each era, there are new kinds of problems. But many of us tend to think of them like simple, just bigger. And they're not just simple. They're not just bigger, they're different. So we need to start identifying problems by problem type so that we start bringing the right tools to working on the problem. So then we need to learn, well, how do we do this, right? So for another day. So we can use the trends that we looked at before to look at and influence the future. So let's just take a quick look at those trends again. Faster, uses more technology, more flexible, more people, larger geography, more information, more freedom, more complex. What I'm going to do now is look at the next era. This era exists in many places in the world. Not quite so much in Idaho Falls, in my opinion. Some, not none, but some. So we looked at those three. Now we're going to look at this recreation era or recreation era, both. And that has augmented media. And we'll talk some about augmented media in a minute. What does that mean? So let's look at transportation. So what does transportation look like in this era? Oh, looks kind of like this, or driverless cars, or right, which are existing right now around the world, right? So transportation, quite different. How about music? We have started to take so much information about music that we can process digitally now. This is an app that you can get for your phone that will tell you all of the samples, little pieces of other people's music that people have taken and put in their music. So this group, Daft Punk, has used 684 samples. They've covered other people's songs 242 times, and they have redone their own work, remixed their own work 104 times. So music has become, in addition to everything else, highly digital. Not, by the way, just Daft Punk kind of music. This is from a jazz quintet, right? And they are sampling too. So it's not just those folks. Well, what about work? Now we have virtual reality and extended reality, not only in training, but actually in operating rooms, right? So work is can be quite different. How about keeping order? Well, we get purpose. So if you thought trust was a little bit hard to absorb, purpose is a next level up in conceptual thinking. Purpose is people and groups and organizations and governments will stay together as long as they agree on a purpose. As soon as they don't agree on the purpose, they're gone. They're just gone. So this, you'll see Coca-Cola up there, right? And you might guess why Coke is doing this, partly for really good reasons and partly for marketing reasons, right? But they work, Rain works with providing clean water to 300 international and local partners. Some of those are big governments, some of those are tiny villages, some of those are individuals, some of those are nonprofits. That didn't happen a lot before in the world, where these sort of unparalleled people and groups came together, right? And they're held together by purpose. And it's really interesting when that purpose goes away, they go away because there's nothing holding them, right? They're not part of bureaucracy, right? So, okay, no purpose, no. Very interesting that I'm starting to see businesses put themselves out of business. I've just seen 2 different businesses say, you know what, we accomplished what we had set out to accomplish. We're dissolving the company and we're going to go do other things. So purpose. So what about structure? So here's a look at structure. This is what a driverless car sees. Over here is what we see. That's what the driverless car sees. And our world is now overlaid with this, right? Our world now has this structure. How do we educate our children? Well, first of all, we shouldn't just be educating our children. We should be educating everyone all the time. Everyone, all the time. And how do we do that? Well, we do it with TikTok, right over there. I'm learning how to fix pan. And with grandparents teaching grandkids, and with grandkids teaching grandparents, and anybody who knows how to weld teaching somebody else how to weld. And if I were to ask you for one thing that you do after this today, that would be to always be teaching somebody something. I don't care how to make a cherry pie. I don't care what it is, and always learning something. We still need our bureaucratic schools, but they cannot move fast enough to keep up with the world. And so we need to develop right here, everybody learning, everybody teaching all the time. And if you start with the things that are easy for you, it's easier to do, right? Just doesn't matter what you're teaching, teach something. And then it will come that we start teaching each other different kinds of things. So how do we evaluate others? So now we start to be evaluating who you're associated with. So all those other things plus who you work with. Film producers don't typically hire a camera person. They hire a camera crew because these folks already know how to work together, and it's faster than hiring 17 other different people who are going to have to learn how they work together. They want all 17 to already know each other, know how they work, and perform well. This is an ad for a postdoc in Mexico. Please come with stakeholders. That's what we expect. We expect you to come with associated people. And then, of course, problem types are going to change because we have non-human players, right? So what do I mean by non-human players? We have people and constructed entities. And those constructed entities have varying degrees of independent action, right? So some are very independent, some are not so much. So robots and driverless cars, but also artificial intelligence. A number of universities are now actually encouraging their students to use artificial intelligence in their writing, in their school writing, actually endorsing it. So here's an interesting problem. Somebody uses artificial intelligence in their application for graduate school and doesn't get in. Is it the student's problem? The software designer's problem? The school's problem for endorsing it? Whose problem is it? Did the student not choose the right software? So very interesting, different kinds of problems. If a driverless car gets in an accident, who do we go look to about that? So what? I think you can use the trends to see that most weird new behavior has a purpose. So very often when we see people doing new things, it looks weird and we are not so happy about it and kind of judgmental and why are they doing that weird thing? If we use the genes and the trends, often we can find that there's a reason that people are doing that. And that helps us to then be able to, instead of judge, participate and be able to influence the cultural gene, right? Okay, so now we are at mapping ourselves. I'm going to hand this out with some help from Sheila. And we're going to talk about where you belong. Where you belong in this diagram or in this set of nested dolls. Where do you belong? So before you start, don't do it quite yet. I'm going to give you some dates, so that'll help. Okay. But the first thing I want you to know is that change doesn't happen immediately and evenly. It does not. So let's take an innovation that everybody's familiar with. We started TV quite a long time ago. I remember our first TV when I was a kid, right? So TV happened a long time ago and everybody said, oh, everything's going to change. We got this weird new thing and we put it in our living rooms or sometimes in our dining rooms and we eat TV and watch. We eat dinner and watch and it's really weird and it's going to change everything. And then what happened is it didn't change everything. It didn't. So we had these inflated expectations. But what happened was TV hung around and it kind of became invisible as part of our life. And then it really did change our lives. Absolutely. But we kind of didn't even notice anymore. So eras change when the entire shape of society changes. Transportation, music, work, structure, keeping order, education, evaluating others' problems, and lots of other things. What we mean by trust, who a person is. All those different kinds of things, all those things change. Society sort of judders a little bit and then reforms in a new way so that the patterns all kind of match each other like we saw at the beginning, right? Those patterns all kind of matched each other. So, doesn't happen right away, but it does happen. So now let's talk about when did these things happen, and I'm going to give you this so that you'll be able to put it down next to your doll. I'll walk you through it, but you'll be able to have it right in front of you when you're putting where you think you are. So for the deep past, hunting and gathering, about 150 to 250,000 years ago, depends on whose research you believe. Writing and agriculture, about 20,000 years ago in the Western world. And by the way, all of this applies basically to the Western world. There are other societies that have had other paths, right? Other paths are possible. So this is an interesting thing. So when we come to the manufacturing era, we actually got a printing press in about 1450, but it didn't change us dramatically until about 1850. It took that long for society to be affected because we could print to really change. Okay, now look at what happened. The information era started about 2000, started. Here's the other thing to know. This is not even around the world. Where it is more complex in the world, the future comes faster. Where it is less complex, the future comes slower. Comes. It's not that it doesn't come, just comes slower. Okay, then we have the recreation era started about 2021 in a lot of cities. The generation era, which we didn't talk about, is going to start next year, I believe. So I've already seen some pretty good evidence for this. So I would like, if you would, for you to take your pencil and not your pen, just because you want to have different colors, and put a little asterisk where you think you were born. So where on the doll, so here's mine, right? I was born in the manufacturing era, right? Put a little asterisk where you think you were born on your doll. And anybody who's online who wants to do this, and I send you this and it doesn't work well, or you send it to Jeff, we will arrange a private Zoom call for you so that you can do this. Okay, everybody good? So now let's put a square where you think your parents were born. Where were they born? Not where did they live, where were they born in time? So mine were also born in the manufacturing era. Okay, now your grandparents. Where were your grandparents? That's a box with a line through it. And mine were born in the agricultural age, not in the manufacturing age. So you got to decide where you think, and this is all a guess, some of it, but just your best guess. Okay, and then I want you to put great, 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 great grandparents, a bunch of them. So boxes with X's, where you think they were, that's where mine were. All in the agricultural age for a long time. Lots and lots of boxes with X's. And you don't have to do them all, just some. Okay. Now, if you have kids, I don't have kids, so I co-opt my nieces and nephews with their knowledge. Where were your kids born? And I put names on them so I can keep it straight. And when you have that, if you have grandkids, where are your grandkids born? And if you have lots and lots of them, you don't need to do all of them. But This is where they were born. And it's kind of easier to remember if you label them, but you know, this is not a test. This is just you kind of playing and learning. So, okay. So now you're going to shift colors. So take your pen. I suggest you can do whatever you want, but I suggest you take your pen and you draw a line. So here's my line. My straight line is how long, what ages I think I have already lived through. And then my dotted line is my guess for how many more I'm going to live through. Based on how fast they happen, based on how long I think I might live, based on all those things. Sorry? So this line is how long where I think I have lived. And then the dotted line is where I think I'm going to live. Just straight out through the different eras. Then you can do your parents. You notice that I think mine got to the information age, but not beyond. And I don't think they got all the way in. They got sort of halfway in my opinion. I remember my mom's first and only email. So this can just give you a feel. All right, so now, then you can do your kids and your grandkids, right, with dotted lines for how long you think, what eras you think they're going to live through. And even if you're not finished, if you have a reasonable handle on this, and you can finish later if you choose, but I think you get the point. Anybody sort of not clear on the point? Okay, so let's look at, would you draw a circle where you think Idaho Falls is? Oh, wait, I'm sorry, before you do that, I want you to look at this, right? Grandparents and grandparents and great grandparents and great grandparents, blah, 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 blah. And look at this. One of the reasons we are having trouble around the world is for centuries we lived in the same era. And now we are not going to live in the same era in our own lifetimes. But we don't have a lot of experience as human beings in how to do this. Right? We don't have a lot of experience. And so we're seeing conflict, people calling each other names. You know, this is how the truth should be. Like that. Okay, now Idaho Falls. So that's my guess. You can put your guess where you think it is. And by the way, it's never uniform, right? It's never uniform. The future always comes and pings on us a little bit, but where you basically live most of your time and attention. And then I would say, this is where I think a lot of the farming communities outside of Idaho Falls are. So you'll notice that I don't have them just in agriculture. And since I lived in New York City for a really long time, I have lots of friends there. And that's where I think New York City is. Right? And individuals within all of those are in different places. And I'm in different places in a day, right? I'm in different eras in a day. So what? So the first is for those who are so inclined to connect to their kids and grandkids in different ways than they might have been doing that before. Help your kids become skilled in evaluation, all the different kinds, and teach them about the advantages and disadvantages of each. Really important. We have teenagers committing suicide over Facebook, not a good plan, right? Recognize that screens are part of kids' bodies, and maybe some of yours too. Ask your kids to host family Zoom. So move into helping them do what they're going to need to be doing in their lives. Bring your values to that, show your leadership, right? Bring the things that you think are important, but see if you can put yourselves in where they need to be. Always be teaching and learning, and make sure you're learning about society from the kids. And if you don't have any, like I don't, make sure you got young people in your life. It's really important. So thinking about work, you might be able to see that the Great Resignation would have happened even without COVID-19. Might have been a little bit slower, but probably not much. And that's because a lot of our workplaces are still bureaucratically and a little bit information organized, but our society is moving faster and faster into not only information, but recreation. And so a lot of people are saying, you know what? I don't want to get paid not very much, have a really boring job, get yelled at, be supervised by cameras. I don't want to do that. And you know what? During COVID, I found out I could do something else. So understand why marketing is losing effectiveness. It's not gone. Marketing still works, but it is losing effectiveness. If bureaucracy is too slow and not flexible enough, what then? So you can use cultural genetics to sort through things that organizations might do, choices they might make. And then thinking about our community, you might understand why big institutions, many of our big institutions that we trusted, have lost some of our trust. Our health system might be an example of one of those that's lost a lot of our trust. Step up to be a connector. If you can see these eras, step up to reduce the conflict and create better genes. Bring your values to the future. And that's it. Thank you very much. And I would take questions and whatever else. Yeah.
Question about the circle you suggested for Idaho Falls.
Yeah.
With that, because when I was thinking about it, they would have maybe raised it up a little because of all the young people.
And there are young people everywhere. I don't think there's enough. Whoops, one more. Yep. Yeah, we do have a lot, but I don't think there's enough who's. Remember that the whole society has to break apart and come together again. So they have little pieces, I think, but I think they don't live in a society that's reformed. Does that make sense? And you can have a different opinion, right? You can have a different opinion. Yeah.
I was thinking of my friends.
Yeah. And if they don't live here, they might be further. Yeah. Other questions? So I will say about this that for many people, your questions come in a little bit. Like you go home tomorrow morning when you're taking a shower, say, but wait, what about this? Right? So you can reach out to me, or you can reach, oh, I didn't mean to do that. I meant to do this. You can reach out to me, or Jeff, yeah. So I have a whole list for that, and it's too much to do here, but you and I could talk about that. Yeah, yeah. You know, trying to cram this into something that's, you know, not 4 hours, you guys have all come to be at, causes me not to do, you know, more things, but for sure there is, and you can see it. And you can probably see it.
I'm trying to figure out like the couple of declaring for fire.
I believe it will. I believe it will. I do. Yeah.
So I'm going to ask you to put that into the future a little bit more, which I know is tricky. But obviously there is a trajectory in which these eras are changing at sort of at an exponential rate, and right? So the last two that you had there,
Yep.
I mean, is it possible that I mean, a couple more down the road, and we're changing like by the month, by the week.
Well,
Is that
so when I was teaching this in university, kids used to say, next week I'll be in the new era. And it was a joke, but not a joke. So one of the things, Jeff, that I'm looking at now that I haven't had enough time to really spend in is what happens as it gets faster and faster. And does it continue to layer, or do we develop some new adaptation, right? That some of our cultural genes enable us to make those changes in a kind of a different way than we've done in the past, is my guess. That's not a very scientific guess. I have some ways of going about thinking about how to go look at that. Other questions?
So basically, the siblings went off to the manufacturing world. And sometimes, now, mothers, they were farmers.
Yep.
Why is Joe in college? He got a college degree. Why is he going to graduate school? No.
So absolutely, my family goes to college. The ones that are farmers go to college because guess what? They're fertilizing their fields using GPS, right? So they are not, now there are almost no places in the world that are quote uncontaminated, by which I mean just touched by global communication, right? It's almost not impossible, but it's almost impossible. And as soon as that happens, you know, people get on their phones, which is what they typically get first, and they see interesting things like absolutely mythical apartments in New York City. They're way larger than any human beings could afford, but they see other lifestyles. And they say, hey, I want that, or I want pieces of that, or I want, right? And all of this shifts, right? It all shifts. So yes, farming, but farming not like the generations of farmers in my family who did not exactly the same thing. I mean, really agricultural society is very durable. If you think about the world and all the places that people farm and all the different things they've adapted to and all the climate changes that they've adapted to in the past, it's really very, very durable. But it adapts. Doesn't adapt typically as fast, but it adapts. That make sense? Yeah.
I have, I don't have plans. I yeah.
Exactly.
Work with farmers. And they're major in agriculture.
Exactly.
But they're going to be consultants.
Yeah. Yeah. Farmers didn't used to, the consultant was the guy down the road who said, what do you think about that, Joe? Right? So, yeah. 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 Huge change, right? That's an information change, yeah. Yeah, yeah. That's an information change for sure. And it affects all of us. And you know what? Except for when I was in Canada a couple of weeks ago on a vacation where I planned to be out of touch. If I'm not in touch, I'm not a happy camper. right? I'm expecting Wi-Fi to work. I'm expecting cell phones to work. I'm expecting because that's how I live my life. Yeah. Other thoughts? Yeah, well, where I was, they weren't working and it was nice. Would I want to live there 100% of the time? Not so much. Very cool. Yeah. It's good. Anybody who needs to go. Thank you for coming. Other questions or other points or other disagreements or
I was just thinking my 20-year-old grandson is majoring in computer science, but with an emphasis in artificial intelligence.
right.
And it just, I need to really think about that.
Yeah. Yeah. How many of you here in this room use artificial intelligence besides me? Yeah. Right. 3, 4. Right. So here in Idaho Falls. Yeah. I asked how many people here in Idaho Falls you in this room use artificial intelligence. So that would be me and Gina and Jeff. Well, and you know, that's a choice.
But I am,
It's a choice.
is there any hope for someone like me who, as my kind friends say, I'm technologically resistant? It's not that I do not have access to, or I cannot do it, but I choose not to do it most of the time.
So people look at me and think I'm an early adapter. I'm actually a moderate adapter to late adopter, but then I'm a power user, right? So I will sometimes have a piece of software sit on the corner of my desk. Well, it doesn't sit there literally anymore. It sits in the cloud. But anyway, effectively sitting on the corner of my desk, which I did when they were physical boxes, and not use it for 6 months because it's going to take me too long to learn it. And I need to do what I'm doing and I need to get it done, right? So I don't, remember I said not better or worse? Not better or worse. It's a choice.
Unfortunately, I have many friends who put up with me.
It's a choice. It's a choice.
When I call them on the phone, they pick up because they know I want to hear their voice.
Right.
I know how to text, but that doesn't mean I want to text.
I got it. And one of the points I really want to make over and over and over again is that there's value in different eras, right? And we got to stop this nonsense of making it wrong, right? The future wrong, the past, it's not wrong. It's adapted to something different, right? It's just different. Other comments?